Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and it is Banlist season, baby! Aka free content season for Yugi tubers. Now the Banlist this time around is a little different than it's been in the past, mostly because nothing really needs to be changed. There's a set coming out after the ban list, which is set to release in October, called Burst of Destiny, which will change a lot about the current meta. So using a ban list to change cards that will be legal for maybe a month seems like a bad idea on Konami's part. And because the format is in a historically good place, they might well just not do anything. Because of that, I'm going to use this banlist season not as an opportunity to talk to you about what I think will happen, but to do what I've done for the last couple of banlists and talk about what I would like to happen. And what I would like to happen is for them to remove bloat. Now, what is banlist bloat? Well, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Banlist hovers around 200 cards total. Comparable formats like Legacy in Magic the Gathering have a 50-something card ban list, even though they've existed for many years prior. Now, why is that? Well, it's because Yu-Gi-Oh! Very rarely takes cards off the ban list. The ban list right now is littered with FTKs that were strong in 2011 and playmakers for archetypes that were game-warpingly good in 2014. I think we can remove a lot of those. And I will be hosting a tournament to ensure that nothing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Breaks after we do so. Now, we've done this a couple of times now with varying results. The first one of these tournaments, nothing changed, I was right. The second, True Draco won. And I have learned nothing from that experience. We are going to unhit even more cards than we did last time. Let me show you what I'm working with right now. So first up, what I would like to see banned, and this includes the only hit upwards that isn't contingent on other hits downward, Imperial Order. I hate this card. I cannot stand it. I do not understand why they unbanned it, and every format since I have been lobbying for it to finally get back on the list. I think we're close. I think we have almost reached a fever pitch of people frustrated about how miserable this card is to play against, and I hope that we finally see it go. Now, the rest of these hits are contingent on other cards coming off of the ban list. Wind Up Hunter, Topologic Bomber Dragon, and Lyrilisc Independent Nightingale all rely on other cards being moved. So for now, don't worry about them, but we will, of course, talk about them when the card to which they are tied is shown. This is the limited list. We've got one copy of Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Infernos. The Dragon Rulers were a series of really powerful cards that dominated the metagame like in 2014. Nowadays, they are probably still too strong, but in order to be good, you need a critical mass of them, and we really don't have that. Only one Dragon Ruler is unlimited, it's at 1, and though it did see a short stint of playability in Dragon Link decks, it has since completely fallen off. The next least frustrating Dragon Ruler to unhit is Blaster, and though its typing is a lot better, its fire attribute, and there are some decks like Infernoble Knight that might be able to take use of it, I still don't think it's going to be a problem. Cyberjar is a weird one. Cyberjar itself is not a very powerful card. It's a flip-summoned monster that destroys everything on the field, and then both players draw 5 cards, summoning any level 4 or lower monsters that they find in those 5. It sets up really gummy battle phases, but it's actually not particularly strong, either as a removal spell or a draw option. There are better for both. The reason we are only putting it to 1 instead of 3 is because if you have too many jars legal, it enables Empty Jar, a very frustrating deck. Now, Empty Jar aims to draw both players out of cards the first turn. The reason that I am not super concerned about it is because since you see your entire deck, if your opponent boards into any hand traps, they are going to be able to activate all of them. And that means that you are going to find yourself on the receiving end of an Ash, a Veiler, an Infip, and probably a Droll, all of which pretty much end your combo. Fairy Tail Snow is a contentious unhit to be sure. It's a very powerful defensive option, very good for link laddering, and it procs cards that trigger when they are sent from the graveyard to the banished zone, like the Thunder Dragons, but I am 1, not concerned about the Thunder Dragons, 2, not concerned about banishing 24 cards from your extra deck in order to get 3 activations of this bad girl in 1 turn, and 3, not convinced that the format's in a place where there's enough OTK decks a defensive tool will actually be particularly relevant. I'm willing to be proven wrong on this card. It is certainly very good, but I'd like to see what you come up with. Magispector Unicorn Kirin is on here as well. Pendulum can pretty much get anything they want as long as Electromite remains banned. Kirin is maybe the exception to that rule. This card is really, really strong, but I think at 1 copy it's probably defensible. We've got Chicken Game. The biggest mistake I did last time was putting all of these draw spells to 3. We are not making that mistake again, but I don't think the difference between 2 upstarts in Upstart and Into the Void and 3 upstarts in those 2 and Chicken Game is going to make a very meaningful difference. Heavy Storm. I don't understand why this card is not legal, but Harpy's Feather Duster is. Back in the day, it was because you could pop your own stuff and turn off your floodgates or something. These days, that doesn't matter. People will talk about how Eldritch could maybe make use of this by popping their own back row and then floating, but Eldritch can float off of their back row by activating the back row. You want to get value off of it before you send it to the graveyard the first time anyway. Next, we've got Spellbook of Judgment, another hugely contentious hit. Spellbook of Judgment is, of course, extremely powerful. It's a way to add like 1,000,000 cards from your deck to your hand at the end of the turn and summon Jaugen the Spiritualist from deck. I don't think anyone's losing to Jaugen these days, and I think the spellbook pool is limited enough that it's not going to be too much of an issue. And finally, Trap Dust Shoot. I wanted to put this to 3, and chat talked me out of this. Trap Dust Shoot is very, very good exactly the first draw phase. If you draw it, it is also not fantastic, because it only is killer against decks that don't have a ton of 1-card starters. Prankids, for instance, can just show you a hand that includes 2 Prankids, and you lose the game on the spot. Drytron can show you a hand with 3 Drytrons, and you're dead, and even decks that brick like Virtual World have a ton of ways around this. After that first draw phase, this card is pretty much unplayable because no one keeps 4 cards in their hand for the rest of the game. And now the Unlimits. There's a lot here, so I'm going to go as fast as I can. First, the cards that will never be unlimited because of technicalities. Exodia the Forbidden One and its pieces, Victory Dragon, and Self-Destruct button. Now, Exodia could go to 3 tomorrow with no change. The Exodia cards themselves are very bricky. You want to play them in a deck that draws the rest of its deck, and you don't want to end up with 5 Exodia pieces in hand, but it's like all legs. That doesn't win you the game. 1-1-1-1-1-1 is the optimal ratio of Exodia pieces, but the reason it will never go to 3 is because they want Exodia to be unique. They want it to be the only one in the universe, and I can respect that. Victory Dragon is consistent with other match winners which say this card cannot be used in a duel. It also creates this weird sportsman-like conduct violation where one person's scooping really early in order to not lose the entire match, and maybe a judge has to come over and explain to the owner of Victory Dragon that it actually doesn't do anything. I don't really buy that argument, but I think consistency is probably good enough. And finally, Self-Destruct button. This one's just on here because tie rules are really frustrating. If one person wins the first game and then ties the second game, they win the match. Next up, Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. This card was errata a couple of years ago, and I think people forgot. This could go to 3 tomorrow, no problem. The Tyrant Neptune and Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom are both on here for the same reason. If you tribute over a Lyrilisc Independent Nightingale, you can basically FTK your opponent. We can remove that possibility by banning Lyrilisc Independent Nightingale, a card that no one is playing. After that, we have True King Lithosogem, the Disaster. This card was good in Dinosaur many formats ago, destroying both Petit Pteranodon and Baby Sarosaurus. Since then, Dinosaur has completely fallen off the face of the earth in the wake of the Miscellaneousaurus hit, and Lithosogem has been, I think, at 1 for a little bit now with no negative consequences. Next up is Masterpiece and Dynamite Knight. Now, I know what you're thinking. Joseph, True Draco literally just won one of these. Why are you giving the Masterpiece back? Now that I'm full of copium, let me explain. The reason that True Draco was able to take the last one had very little to do with the fact that Masterpiece was at 3, and a lot to do with the fact that every single draw spell was unlimited. This was a huge oversight on my part. True Draco thrives in a format where it can draw its entire deck every game, and the person who played it used those draw spells in order to find Floodgates. We have really dialed back the availability of Floodgates, and I think this deck is not going to be a problem. What's more, the way the bracket was designed, True Draco never fought a difficult matchup for it until, like, semifinals. Shockingly, it never had to go against Eldritch, which I maintain is like a 90-10 for Eldritch. And thirdly, did you know that since the last Moron Banlist tournament and this one, a card was printed that is almost always an out to Masterpiece, Dragoon, and that the answers people are packing for Dragoon in their sideboard coincidentally answer Masterpiece as well? Something to think about. Dynamite Knight is maybe a problem. Next up, we've got Phoenix Cluster, Amaryllis, and Samsara Lotus. These are FTK enablers that mostly go alongside Topologic Bomber Dragon, which we have banned. Again, you can give Pendulum pretty much everything back and nothing would change. Double Iris, Perform House Skullcrobat Joker, and Astrograph Sorcerer were all cards that were very good because of Electromite. Servant of Endymion was independently strong, but I think the level of the deck is so far below what it needs in order to be playable that this card can easily come back as well. After that are the Dangers, Nessie, Chusinoko, and Jackalope. Now, these cards were the cornerstone of a deep draw deck that people thought would, like, FTK everywhere that really never manifested. There were a couple of tops for, like, Jesse Cotton on, like, a deep draw, Dark World, Graphaloop FTK. These days, one, I don't think those decks would cut the mustard, but two, I don't think any new enablers have been printed. Dark Grepher is a very powerful card. It sends a dark monster from your deck to the graveyard. Why did I leave this unbanned? Because there's 15 other cards that do the same thing. I think that the discard is maybe a little bit of a downside compared to Armageddon Knight, which is why I haven't put that card to 3, but it shocks me to think that anyone would consider this in any sort of relevant meta deck. I can already hear you typing away, what about Orchist? Did you know that Orchist has the greatest starter in the history of time in Gearsu, and the deck is still bad? After that is Phantom Skyblaster. This is a tricky one. Everyone always tells me this card is seconds away from being the greatest card in the format, and it never is. I think even in the format where it was legal, it was not very good. It's a great way to normal summon a monster, get a bunch of tokens, and potentially go for a Link 4, but there's a million ways to do that, and I just don't think it's very competitive with a normal summon compared to the starters that decks want to be playing. If you want to waste your normal, post-spending specials on getting things on field on a card that summons 2 tokens in order to link into an Apollosa, get in line. There's a lot of decks that do stuff like that. I don't think this is going to be an issue, and there's almost no way to search it either. Gen X Ally Birdman is a cornerstone of an FTK that has pretty much never been playable. Fiber Jar is a very funny card, but not a very strong one. It shuffles everyone's stuff back into the deck, and then everyone draws 5 cards. Very, very funny. But the reason that this was hit had nothing to do with power level and everything to do with unfun game states, which I am all about. After that, we've got Night Assailant. This is on the list because you can loop it with itself, sending it to the graveyard, and then adding a Night Assailant from your graveyard back to your hand. That is not very powerful. There's not a ton of payoffs. It's a little hard to set up. And keep in mind that Speed Duels, a format that does have a payoff in XYZ Dragon Cannon, and does have Foolish Burial at 3, so this is always accessible, has this combo, and it's not good enough to play. We've got Morphing Jar in here, same kind of deal as Cyber Jar, not a particularly good card, but in tandem with all of the other jars, maybe enables Empty Jar, a deck I am not really scared of anyway, but we certainly will test. Cyber Stein, this card was again the cornerstone of one of those like deep draw FTK decks, but it relied on so many other individual cards, the card that makes you not have to pay for, Psychic-type monsters' effects, Reproducus turning it into a Psychic, and then, of course, extra deck monsters, all of which require you to be on this huge high-investment strategy. I don't think this is very good, and I think the difference between 1 and 3 is pretty minimal when you already have to find a bunch of other cards to fire it more than once in one turn. Yatagarasu! People don't want to hear this. Card's bad. It has been bad almost its entire lifespan. It was good exactly once when you could Chaos Emperor Dragon, then normal summon Yatagarasu. It is not very good anymore. This card has to be your normal summon, competes very hard for it. There are some ways around it with cards like Shinobirds, but those are not very good. It locks your opponent out of the top of the deck, but that doesn't really matter in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Mostly what you're managing is your hard once per turns, not your top of the deck. I think this card is completely fine, could come back tomorrow, no changes. Quick Fix is a weird one. Quick Fix is, of course, a very powerful card without a once per turn on it, which is frightening, to say the least. But Quick Fix is also the cornerstone of a deck that is terrible. No master plan means it's very hard to pop off with Spiral, though I encourage you to try. Raigeki could come to 3 no problem. We have 3 Lightning Storm. It's certainly frustrating to play against, but I think it's not more debilitating than anything else people have in terms of blind second tools. Sekka's Light, I have no idea why that's limited. If you want to play a 37 monster deck with 3 Sekka's Light, go ahead. The only deck it ever enabled was that like Block Dragon BA deck, and that deck was sweet and not game-crushingly bad. Minecon, another really powerful going second tool. Between this and Pankratops, I think Minecon is maybe a little worse, but I am willing to be persuaded otherwise by people playing this in their sideboard. Reasoning could come to 3 no problem. This card is not particularly good, sees next to no play at 1. Slash Draw is part of an FTK that is enabled by deep draw tools, which I don't think we have as much access to as is necessary to make this consistently powerful. Another one of those Graphaloop Saruya decks that just never manifested out of a single event. Card Destruction, same deal. This is a minus. It's refilled filling your opponent's hand in a format where everyone wants all their cards in the graveyard. Gold Sarcophagus, too slow to actually search anything. Procs like Thunders, but honestly, who cares about that? Final Countdown has always been fine at 3. This card, I was shocked to see was at 1, to be honest. Draco Face Off, another pendulum tool that could come off tomorrow. Not a big deal. The cards that you have to play in order to enable this card are terrible, especially by modern standards. Chain Strike enables this long burn deck that we already have a million enables for anyway. Gateway of the Six enables 6-Sam FTK, but not more than anything else. You can already search Gateway in the 6-Sam deck. You just need to open another card that holds Bushido counters, and there's a million of those. This just makes that a little more flexible. 6-Sam FTK has always been about losing to other things than the availability of this card. Mass Driver. This is a contentious one. This is a contentious one. This was the FTK engine in Frog FTK back in the day, and I think that it's fine. It's just like a slightly better Cannon Soldier, and I don't think that's enough to win you the game. What's more, it's almost not searchable at all, so you'd have to hard open Mass Driver or draw functionally your entire deck and summon like 20 monsters, and if you're doing that, you probably deserve to win anyway. Dimensional Fissure is of course a floodgate, but the type of floodgate that I'm okay with, because it's not like your opponent can't play, it's your opponent has to make Nightmare Phoenix before committing to anything else. Butterfly Dagger Elma is fine. This card FTK'd with Gearfried, the Iron Knight, and Royal Magical Library, if I recall correctly, but honestly, that is such a ridiculous amount of setup that I don't think it even deserves discussion. Divine Wind of Mist Valley was always part of an FTK that I always heard about, but I never saw it actually take off. Trickstar Light Stage makes Dragoon a little bit easier, but there's so many one-card Dragoon engines, I don't think we need to be worrying about this card. Magical Midbreaker Field, I got a lot of shit for last time by saying it's actually not very strong, and it turns out, honestly, it's not very strong. It enables, like, some very specific combo decks to dodge some very specific hand traps, but the diversity of hand traps people are playing these days probably means that it's not that big of a deal. Magical Explosion to 3 is a weird one. This is, in my opinion, not a big deal because there are so many cards that already do the Magical Explosion thing that just limiting actual Magical Explosion doesn't actually accomplish much. The reason Magical Explosion is losing is because it's a bad deck that accomplishes nothing, not that it doesn't have enough Magical Explosions. Time Seal, another card that's terrible. Did you know you can't activate this before your opponent draws their card for their first turn? That's right. It never hits their 6th card. The earliest you can activate it is during your opponent's draw phase after they have drawn, cutting them off of their 4th turn draw. Not good. Wall of Revealing Light is a floodgate for attacking, but the reason that it was hit is because it allows you to pay 7,000 life points for like self-destruct button. I don't think that's too big of a deal. Macro Cosmos is another one of the Dimensional Fissure floodgates. A little better because it's a trap, but you can solemn this one. In the extra, we of course have the Supreme King Starving Venom. We also have Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. This is not a once per turn, which is why people are scared. It could banish 3 cards from your hand, but if Hand Loop was good, Water would have been the best deck in the last 8 formats. Unfortunately, with so many one-card starters, you just can't reliably rip 4 cards out of your opponent's hand and expect to win the game. And if you're any on crap like Trishula, which has no on-field effects, and your opponent normal summons a Prank Kid, you lose the game. Next up is TG Hyper Librarian. This one I'm a little suspicious about, to be honest, after playing that Dawn of Majesty Stardust Synchron deck. I think there is an argument that that deck will deep draw you out of the fucking game, but I'd like to see it happen, and I think it would be funny. Danglong, First of the Yangzing. This is a card that I do not like removing. A lot of people love this card with every fiber of their being. I hated playing against it, but in today's modern metagame, spending a bunch of garnets on 1 negate is probably not too big of a deal. Beatrice at 1 versus Beatrice at 3 changes literally nothing but some FTKs that are too inconsistent to care about. Diagusto Emerald was... Why was this card hit? It was like a portion of the Zodiac deck, and they banned it because they didn't want to deal with the Zodiacs because they had just come out, and then they unhit it, but they never unhit it past 1 because there was rumors of a World Chalice FTK. I mean, it is not a good card. Tolmaeus. This is a strange one. This card in the past let you overlay for a Cyber Dragon Infinity in decks that should not have been making it. These days, knock yourself out, buddy. If you want to spend 2 4s on a Cyber Dragon Infinity, oh, let me actually 3 4s on a Cyber Dragon Infinity. go right ahead. There's some like time loop combo, but it is almost impossible. And finally, wind-up carriers and Meidi. I'm still not convinced that wind-ups should be let off. We took out Hunter, so you can't hand loop anymore, but wind-ups are a very powerful spam deck. I would like to see someone pilot them successfully. So hopefully you can agree with me on, if not all of these cards, probably a majority of them. I think tomorrow, Yu-Gi-Oh! Could probably take like 30 cards off the ban list and change nothing, but I do want to push that idea to its absolute limits. So if you think the cards that I have listed here would break Yu-Gi-Oh! Forever, I invite you to prove it. Like the last couple of times, we will be hosting the third Moron Banlist Tournament. If you go to the Discord link in the description, there is a channel called Moron Banlist Tournament and Moron Banlist Tournament Submissions. If you have a deck that you think breaks the game and uses this ban list, I invite you to submit it there. Tonight on stream at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, immediately after watching Progression Series, so probably about 8:30, I will be going through the submissions document and picking 16 individuals who I think are the most representative of the most broken decks that you could play during this ban list. We will duke it out over the course of the next couple of days and then watch the replays that Wednesday. Winner gets, I don't know, like a box of the latest set and a trophy. How's that sound? So if you think my terrible idea will ruin Yu-Gi-Oh! For the second time, show me. And I'll see you this Wednesday.